On today's episode, we'll be talking about dark entities, a haunted workplace, and a phantom scream. These stories and more on this edition of Paranormal Mysteries. Thank you for joining me and welcome. I am your host, Nick Ryan. I hope that everyone's been having a good week so far, and before we start, I'd like to say thank you to Grizzly Bear for their support and generosity. If you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing, sharing, and reviewing the podcast. This supports us by helping new listeners to discover the show. And if you'd like to support us even further by becoming a patron or by donating, please visit us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries or at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. These links and others can be found in the show notes. And if you've encountered the paranormal and would like to share your story, please email me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com. All experiences, no matter how big or small, are always welcome. And with that in mind, our first story comes to us from M. And M says, "Hi Nick, let me tell you a story about when I was a kid. My boyfriend introduced me to your channel, and he convinced me that I had to tell my story. I remember being 7 years old, and we lived in an old house. This is my first time, and since my grandfather was a witch doctor from Mexico, I have plenty of stories. Please believe these are real. My family and I have actually lived through this. When I was around 8, in that house, my mom would let us have a bath with bubbles once a week. I remember I hated that time because I knew what was going to appear, but I was afraid to tell her. When I was in the bathtub, I remember playing with my bubbles and having a good time, but I knew something bad was coming, and it always started the same. Our wall in the bathroom was plain white, and sure enough, around the same time, black handprints would start to appear and disappear as they got closer to me. It would start in the corner, and slowly the hands would appear in black and just get closer and closer to me until the hands would appear on my neck, and I would scream. The hands were small like that of a child, and that's what scared me, is that I thought if this thing kills me, I will be the same, just a small ghost that will kill me. When I asked my sister if the same thing ever happened to her, she would ignore me and walk away. This would always happen on a Friday, and sure enough, I would remember the black hands come closer and closer until I felt the words, 'You will die if you tell anyone.' So I would scream and then just keep it a secret. Thank you for your podcast and for what you do. I know it sounds crazy, but it really happened to me. Sincerely, M." Our next story comes to us from Isabel, and Isabel says, "Hello. I just wanted to come here to get some paranormal experiences off my chest. I've lived in the current house I'm in since I was born. My parents bought it off a family that had lived there since about 1864 or 1865. Most of the previous occupants have either passed away or are no longer in contact with us, but 2 of the owners did pass away inside the house, one in the living room and one in the kitchen. My experiences have only ever been malicious ones, but I'll get into that soon. My dad does paranormal investigation as a hobby, and so is very much in contact with the spirit world. However, every time I did an investigation with him, paranormal experiences always seemed to happen to me afterwards. For example, he would say, 'If you're here, please show yourself in some way,' and he would then take a break and go see my mom for a few minutes, only for my phone and bottle to fall off the table without any logical reason. As well as this, he has been doing investigations without me before, and things such as my towel have been moved by themselves with no context. Once my towel was even lifted, as if someone had taken the corner of it and then dropped it. I have heard growling before without even knowing my dad was doing an investigation until after the event, and I have even been scratched without any plausible reason. I have attached 2 images of the scratches. Once when I was getting changed into my nightwear at about 11:58 p.m., I swear I heard loud footsteps in the hallway outside my door, and the wall hanger hanging on the handle of my wardrobe flipped around to face the other way. I heard it happen, and there was absolutely no way I could have done that by just nudging it. Another time at 2 a.m., while everyone in my house was upstairs, I heard my heavy, long wooden dining room table move downstairs. It's notorious for moving and making a loud sound when it's moved, and as it moved, the floor literally shook, and I was a bit shocked. My dad and I were doing a paranormal investigation last week, and we asked a question to the spirits that were with us. I can't remember what the question was, but a computer mouse that was believed to be broken and hasn't been plugged in for about a year came on, and the red light stayed on for about an hour. I just find these experiences very strange. Isabel also sent in a video of some strange activity in her uncle's bar, and I'll post it along with her pictures on our forum. Our next story of the night comes to us from Gibran, and Gibran's story is called Dreams. Gibran says, "Hello. I started listening to your podcast a couple months ago, and I wanted to share a couple of dream experiences with you. The first one, to be honest, is a little different. I was about 12 to 13 years old, and there was this girl in my classroom. I'll call her Rain, who I always thought was cute, and I know she liked me as well. One night, I had a dream about the two of us going to the movie theater, and while we were waiting for the movie to start, I started ripping off her clothes, and we ended up having sex. I didn't think anything of it when I woke up. I just thought it was one of those dreams. But then I went to school, and another friend told me that Rain had a dream about me. She told me what her dream was about, and it was exactly the same as mine, down to every single detail. I don't know if it meant something, or what it was, but I always thought it was interesting. The second, I guess, is some kind of prophetic dream. This happened about a year ago. My brother told me he was going to this party during the weekend, and the day before the party, I had a dream where I was trying to convince him not to go. When I woke up, I had the feeling that something was going to happen during the party, and I wanted to tell him not to go, but I wasn't sure how to approach him about it, so I decided not to tell him at all, and he went to the party. It was about 3 to 4 a.m., and I was asleep when I received a call from him. I was hesitant to answer because I wanted to continue my sleep, but then I remembered my dream and decided to answer the phone just in case. Turns out he was drunk driving, and he crashed into another car. Luckily, it was his friend's car, so he didn't have to pay anything, and also nothing happened to him. I've actually had a lot of these types of dreams, and people in my family have had them as well. My grandmother even says there was a witch in my family back in the day, but I don't know if I believe that. Thanks for taking the time to read my stories. Gibran. Our next story comes to us from Casey, and Casey's story is called Something is Attached to Me. Casey says, "Hi again. I've shared to your podcast a few times before, and I figured it was time for a new story. So I wanted to preface this story as to a little background information that I've covered in one of my other stories I've shared. My father was possessed in my childhood home, and he pulled a gun on my mom and I. After my parents divorced, my mom got custody of me, but I still visited my dad on weekends. The house was always cold and just had dark energy. I had seen a full-body apparition which climbed onto the bed and then disappeared as I threw the blanket over my head. The TV in the master bedroom, where the prior occurrences took place, would randomly turn on by itself, even if it wasn't plugged in. Eventually, my dad just started shutting the door to the bedroom whenever I visited. Well, I moved in with my mom and grandma to another house. That house had its own fair share of experiences. Specifically, I was babysitting for a friend who is gifted, and my spouse and I went to lay down with the toddler so he could take a nap. He then sits up, points to a corner, and starts screaming bloody murder. Shortly thereafter, the friend comes to pick up her baby, and she walks past the bedroom to use the restroom. She then tells me that she could see a black figure standing at the foot of the bed. Later, I'll discuss my wife and her weird dreams, but I thought I'd put this one in here since it happened at this house, right before it was put up for sale. I had a dream that the house was being broken into, and someone was at the front door. I had a baseball bat, but they took it from me when they came in the house, and then they beat me with it. I woke my spouse up and began telling her my dream, when she tells me that she had just had the same dream, only she had gone to the front door with the bat, and hers kept repeating when she would do the wrong thing. This was about 2 years ago. I currently live in my own home with my spouse, but it hasn't stopped. One incident I experienced was very short-lived, but terrifying nonetheless. I crate my dogs when I'm doing housework, or they'll give in to mischief. Raven started whining in her crate very dramatically, so I stood in front of the crate, probably about 10 feet or so away, and I told her to stop. Then she lowered her head and began growling at me, like a low rumble. It's important to note, she isn't an aggressive dog by any means and has never done this before. I then got very lightheaded and my hands felt like they were on fire. I felt like I was going to pass out, and then it passed almost as soon as it had came, but with it came this intense anger. As soon as my body returned to normal, she stopped growling. I have never experienced this prior, nor has it happened since, and my wife has had her own experiences in the house, including some weird dreams and sleep paralysis type things. My wife woke around 3 a.m. or so and was turned on her side facing the door. She said she was just staring at it, but her nails were digging into the side of her cheek, and she couldn't stop it. The next morning, she had deep gashes in the side of her face, where she had clawed at herself, but she thought it was a dream. She still has scars from this. She also has had another dream that someone was screaming at the bottom of our staircase and calling her name. Turns out that same night, my brother-in-law had a dream he had fallen down the stairs and had broken his leg, and was calling out to her in his dream. Sorry this is so long. However, when I'm listening to these stories, I know that I love the longer ones. So I guess I'll end this by asking you this question. Do you think I'm being followed by a dark entity? I've cleansed this house and the other house to almost no avail, except for maybe a month of relief if that. I'm not religious, but I'm starting to think someone of higher faith of any kind might be my only option. Thank you for reading my story, and take care. KC. Our next story comes to us from Dakota. Dakota's story is called Phantom Scream. Dakota says, Hi Nick, this happened to me while living in my hometown of Brighton, Michigan. My story starts with my friends and I looking around a property that had sat abandoned on one of the far edges of my neighborhood. The house and lot were directly on the edge of the surrounding woods. There were 5 of us, including myself, and we were about 15 years old, primed to do stupid things. Anyway, we had this obsession with getting near this house so we could see if somebody lived there or not, since it always seemed empty. We kept inching onto the property closer to the house, and one of my friends dared another to run up to the front door and try the handle and then run back to us. Of course, after some goading, he tried it. He had to have been within 5 steps of the door when it happened. I saw a shadow at the corner of the woods just behind the tree line, and when I turned toward it, there was a loud, blood-curdling scream that came from that general area that I had seen the shadow in. We all turned and ran back down the street and didn't stop running until we were almost at the other side of the neighborhood. It was pretty creepy, and we never went close again. Later that week, I came up the stairs at my house, walked past my room, and saw a shadow of a man standing in front of my window. I walked past before I realized what I had seen, and when I looked back in, he was gone. I slept downstairs that night. Nobody ever moved into that house in the 20 years I lived there. Thanks for reading and providing us with such a great show and a place to share our stories. Dakota. Our next story comes to us from Sam, and Sam's story is called The Dead Neighbor. Sam says, My house is quite old and always made various creaks and noises at night. I was always used to hearing the heater creaking, my closet door shaking, and my bed making noises. But about 2 months ago, I noticed a change in these noises. I was able to predict most bumps in the night, and I knew it was usually my cat or nothing. However, this was different. It sounded unfamiliar and eerie. It was like a knock on the inside of my closet, then outside my window, and then on my bed. I was scared, so I quickly got up and looked around. My cats weren't there, and nothing had fallen. I checked my phone and came to realize it was 3:48 a.m. I went back to bed, but didn't fall asleep until around 5 a.m. I went to school the next day and forgot about it. Once I came home, my mom shared information with me that chilled me. She told me that my neighbor had died and was dead in her house for over a week. What scared me even more is the fact that my house is split up, so technically she died in my house. That neighbor, however, was never quite fond of me, and I immediately knew it was her. I sat on my couch, which was right outside my bedroom, and I have LED lights which change color only by pressing the remote. My door was open, and I could see the remote on my desk face up. I was looking at my phone when, in my peripheral vision, I saw my lights change to strobe. It was originally on white. I thought it might have been a mistake in the mechanics, but I was still scared. I then changed it back to its original color and then went to sit back down. When I looked back, they had changed again. I walked back into my room and I mumbled, "Stop it, Iris." That was her name. And in front of my eyes, the lights changed back to white. I looked at the remote on my desk and flipped it back over. To this day, my family and I still hear footsteps in my room. Thank you for reading and listening. Sam. Our next story comes to us from Moses, and Moses' story is called Scared Group of Coworkers After Work. Moses says, "This story takes place about 15 years ago. At the time, I worked in a very old building built in the 1930s that was being torn down and rebuilt. The building had its own lore and stories that the people who worked there had passed down to us newbies. One day after work, a group of 4 people, including myself, were in a room cleaning up and gathering our belongings, getting ready to call it a day and head home to rest. We had been joking about the ghost stories of the building and really kind of busting each other's chops about them. I then turned to look at the clock on the wall. I noticed the time and decided to get my stuff and go. I swung open my locker and then heard the clock fall, scraping the wall the whole way down, ending with the crash and sound of broken glass, which we all heard. I felt the floor vibrate right next to my foot where the clock hit the ground. I apologized to the group for the clock and then closed my locker. I looked down expecting to see a mess of glass and plastic to clean up, but nothing was there. I looked up and the clock was still on the wall, ticking away very normally. We all looked around the room at one another, trying to figure out what the racket was, if it was not the clock. There were no other workers in the immediate area, so we could not figure it out. As we all started to chuckle and chortle about it, a small box of office supplies, which was untouched, slid across the table and fell onto the floor. The chuckling stopped. We all gathered our belongings and got out quickly. And no other incidents have been witnessed since that day. Our next story of the night comes to us from Chrissy Lee. Chrissy Lee wrote in previously with a story called House of Darkness, and today's experiences are a continuation of that story. Chrissy Lee says, "It was just me and my mom living there full time, and my siblings lived with our dad. Another crazy fact about that place was that our neighbor was a KKK wizard. He would ride around on his white horse with his hood, and he even had some of his members over one night while burning a large cross. So with that being said, my mom and I never felt comfortable or truly safe there, since I've always had non-white friends over, but we also didn't live in the best place in Orlando either. We made sure that every night the doors and windows were closed and locked up tight. One night I remember waking up. I'm usually up around 2:30 or 3 a.m., needing a drink or something, and I noticed that the main door of the house to my left, out of my bedroom, was open. It was storming really hard that night, and right between me and the door was this dark, shapeless, black figure. It was just there, with yellow, glowing eyes, staring me down. I was freaking out, but I couldn't move or say anything. After what felt like forever, it finally just disappeared, and I was able to move again. I ran straight to the door and closed it. Not like that would have really done anything for me. I didn't get my drink. I just went and laid on my mom's floor and tried to go back to sleep, but I was too scared. Another experience I had at that house. My mom worked late, so I was there alone when I got home from school until about 7 or 8 p.m. This particular day, I had forgotten my key, and my mom had left the back door unlocked for me to get in. So, when I got home, I went to open the door, and I instantly felt a darkness. I opened it anyway, because it was hot outside, and I was already sweating. When I opened the door, it slammed closed. I tried to open it again, and it was locked. I had to wrap my elbow up to break the window to get in. I thought someone was in the house, and now that I look back on it, I wonder why I would put myself in danger if someone was really in there. But when I finally got inside, I heard footsteps, whispering, and things like furniture being moved. Me being me, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and walked through my whole house, but nothing and nobody was there. I tried to play praise and worship music, but the radio kept turning off. Needless to say, I felt like something bad was going to happen, and I went to my very friendly neighbor and stayed there till my mom got home. I truly feel like something would have happened to me that day if I would have stayed in that house. Lastly, I always had dreams about being killed, chased, and tortured every single night. I'm so glad that we left that house. I have so many more experiences outside of this house too, and I'd love to share them if you want. Thanks again for everything, and for listening to all of us that reach out to you. As tonight's edition of Paranormal Mysteries comes to a close, I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in, and a special thank you goes out to M, Isabel, Gibran, KC, Dakota, Sam, Moses, and Chrissy Lee for sharing their experiences. If you've witnessed something that you can't explain, please contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or visit us at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. All of our contact information can be found in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a safe and healthy rest of the week, and we'll see you back here on Friday as we uncover more experiences involving paranormal mysteries.